Whatever season of life you find yourself in, this is what's most important. Whatever season of life that you find yourself in at this moment, there are psalms available to you that you can enter into and whose language gives you your own language, right? To live into the rhythm of these psalms and to pray their prayers and to speak their words just gives you an ability to speak words that maybe you would want to speak, but feel a little like guilty or awkward. Like there are some angry words spoken in desperation in the Psalms. We're going to get to one today. And so maybe they give voice to something that you would struggle to give voice to on your own. At the same time, they give you an opportunity to turn toward all of the goodness and all of the grace and all of the love that God has for you in the midst of those moments. C.S. Lewis says of the Psalms, he says, the most valuable things that the Psalms do for me is teach me to express the same delight in God which made David dance. Right? The same delight in God which made David dance. If you're not into dancing, if that's not your thing right now, if you're not in a moment that would be prone to dancing, Eugene Peterson, kind of on the opposite side, says, the Psalms are not pretty. This is one of the gifts that they have for you. They are not pretty. They are not nice, but they are honest. And honesty is very hard in our culture and in our society today. One of my favorite quotes from that same conversation, this is a conversation between Eugene Peterson and Bono, the Bono from U2. Like this isn't like some like other like lesser known Bono who is like a Christian pastor theologian. Like this is the Bono, right? He says this, why I am suspicious of Christians is because of this lack of realism. I'd love to see more of that in art and in life and in music. Write a song about your bad marriage, about how you're angry. It's Bono. He didn't say angry. I translated it for you. At the government, that's what God wants from you. And then he says, ... the truth. The truth. And it's this great conversation, and maybe we'll send it out in the e-notes this week, between Eugene Peterson, between Bono, that goes into the sort of depths of human emotion and to say, one of the gifts that the Psalms are to you, to us, is this beautiful ability to name exactly what Bono's talking about here, the truth, the moment that you are in, gives you a voice that maybe you wouldn't have on your own. The Psalms are real, maybe about as real as any of the books found within the Bible, at least when it comes to human emotion. They name the fullness of human experience. They name the fullness of human emotion before God. And here's why that's a wonderful thing. If you are exceptionally self-aware and you know and feel the depth of your own emotion, you need to learn the voice that the writer gives in the Psalms. And if you think that you are exceptionally self-aware, but really actually struggle to accurately identify the thoughts and emotions and feelings that you have in reaction to life situation and circumstance, you also need the voice the writer gives in the Psalms. And I think probably most of us find ourselves somewhere in between those two realities. We can all benefit from learning these words and praying these prayers. How many of you have stayed awake long hours, lost sleep over preparing what to say during a particularly important and challenging moment in your life? Yeah, hands, yes, I'm seeing a few nods. Okay, so maybe it's a eulogy at a funeral and you're like, I'm not a public speaker, but I gotta get up and I have to say these words and I need to be able to speak them and that's it, like that's the moment. Maybe it's like a job interview and you're anxious and you're nervous and you're worried and you stay up late and you're preparing every single answer to every single possible question. Maybe it's a presentation at work and you're like, wow, this has like significant consequence for me and I didn't realize that. And so you're up, you're late, you're working. And you are preparing for it, right? Maybe it's your wedding vows. Think back to that moment. I'll tell you what's not a great idea. And listen, like I've done a few weddings in my time. Preparing nothing. Like, you know what never goes well? It never goes well when the groom, and it's always the groom, when the groom says, we're in the rehearsal, so we're standing up there, we're in the rehearsal, and I turn to the couple and I say, now is the time where you will exchange vows. Have you prepared it? And it's always like this, like the bride pulls out a paper and it's like unfold, 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 and it's like page and page, and it's well thought out and it's prepared, and the groom goes, I will come up with it on the fly tomorrow. And I say, no, you won't. It never goes well. It's never the best idea to prepare nothing. The words will come to mind. No, they won't. It's not how it works. Jesus on the cross, his final words, like his final breath, he's breathing his last. He's on his way toward death. The end is very near, and he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from me? Like, that's not an impromptu prayer. Those words don't come to Jesus. It's not some like special revelation. You know what would be great to say in this moment? These new words. It's a psalm that Jesus is quoting, and it's a psalm that had been recited over and over again in moments of suffering, declaring what the felt human experience is in the midst of pain and suffering. It's steeped in generations of tradition and use. It's memorized, it's recited, and it's recited again and again. And that's the gift that the Psalms offer. Prayer works the same way. Don't wait until you're a moment where you need to pray in order to pray. Don't wait until you're looking for an answer to look for an answer. Don't wait until the stakes seem disproportionately high. Learn to pray in the ways that people have prayed for generation after generation. Martin Luther, in his book called Reading the Psalms, this book here actually, he attaches every single psalm. And if you're looking for a daily reader to read through the Psalms, it's short. He has a thought, he has a psalm, and he has a prayer. He attaches every psalm to one of the petitions in the Lord's Prayer and to one of the 10 Commandments. And he says what the Psalms do is they teach us to pray the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, learning to lift high the name of God. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, praying God's kingdom into the world. Give us today what we need for today. He says every single psalm, he actually stops at 31. At about Psalm 31, there's this like long sort of page and a half, and he just says, listen, you get the point by now. You get the picture. You know how to just go and do it yourself. I'm not going to do it for you. But what he wants to do is attach every single psalm to a petition in the Lord's Prayer, teaching us to pray. Teaching us to pray, your kingdom come, our Father who art in heaven, lift high the name of God. And so every summer we slow down, we remind ourselves of those seasons in which we need to read the Psalms and in which we need to slow down and allow them to teach us. And so I'm going to pray and we're going to work through this psalm together. God, thanks for your love and for your grace. And thank you that you've given us language to enter into, language that has meaning and is filled with experience and depth of human emotion and all of the joy and the celebration that we can muster in the face of who you are and how you act toward us and toward the world, and all of the deep anger and bitterness and frustration and wonder and waiting that comes in the midst of life's ups and life's downs. And so as we look at this psalm, Psalm 3, and as we launch ourselves into another season of being in the Psalms, I pray, God, that you would teach us, and I pray that you would remind us of who you are and of whose we are, and that you say we belong to you, and that in knowing that to be true, God, we find in you joy and comfort, peace and salvation. As this psalm says, a shield, one who protects, one who delivers. And so would you remind us of that again, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So Psalm 3, if you have in your Bible, Psalm 3 begins by saying that it is a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Psalm 3 is a great little psalm of lament. It's a psalm of individual lament, and psalms of lament typically follow a similar pattern or the same pattern. It begins with an invocation of God, like a turning toward God, invoking God, his name, who he is, turning your mind toward God, you can think of, and then it follows quickly on those heels with a complaint. It names a complaint. And after naming a complaint, Psalms of Lament turn toward a request for help. And very often, as you can imagine, like in seasons where you might be prone to lament, express exceptional grief and even anger and uncertainty, all of it, those requests can often sound violent and can sound vengeful and be filled with, like we've talked about, the depths of human emotion. There's a request for help. and then there is an expression of certainty in God's provision. That's the movement of these psalms. And so think if there's invocation, turn toward God, express your complaint, name what is going on, and then there is a request for help. In the face of all of this that's going on, God, would you do this? And then because I know, I trust in who you are, because, God, of who you are, not because of who I am, I will express my certainty that you will act, right? It's this expression that I know, I trust that you will be who you say you are. Psalm 3 is a psalm of David. It says when he fled from his son Absalom. It's a very interesting and very fraught with conflict context to a psalm. So you can read the story behind this psalm is found in 2 Samuel chapters 15 to 18. You even have to back up a little bit beyond that to find the full story. Absalom, who is one of the sons of David, leads a rebellion against his father. David is king. David, who is known as the greatest king of Israel until Jesus comes and fulfills his role as Messiah. David, who is known as a man after God's own heart, who is king, who wrote this psalm, had a, a messy family. If you think your family is messy, chances are it might be, probably is. But David's family, also messy. David's family was filled with as much conflict as you can think of and imagine. David's life was filled with conflict, full of sin, poor decision-making. He was, on the one hand, this overbearing and at times abusive leader, and then at other times in the opposite extreme, passive and absent, failed to make decisions that he should have made. David, in the course of his life, it says that he sinned against God. And because of that, people suffered. People suffered in his family and in the kingdom. The events of Psalm 3 are a direct result of some of David's greatest moral failures. And so the background of this psalm includes the murder of Amnon, one of the sons of David, orchestrated by Absalom as revenge for sexual assault, the rape of Tamar, also one of David's children. And so as the story goes, in 2 Samuel, there's a moment after those things had happened where Absalom is angry with his father. He orchestrates revenge, the death of Amnon, his half-brother, and then flees. He's gone for a while. He comes back. There's a moment of reconciliation in their lives between Absalom and David. And then it says David's off. He's doing his thing. Absalom begins to listen to complaints that are named at the city gates. And Absalom, so all of this history, has his own complaints with David as king, has his own history. He goes and he starts listening to the complaints of the people and thinking to himself, listen, there's no judge. Nobody's listening to these complaints. David's not listening to them as king. There's nobody meeting them down at the city gates to hear them. They've got nobody attending to them. I'll go. And he takes men and he takes horses and he goes and he listens to their complaints over and over again. And in the course of listening to his complaints, he tells them, he says, listen, there's nobody to hear your complaints, but if I were appointed, right? If I were appointed judge, I would listen. And if I were appointed judge over the whole land, I would listen to your complaints. You could bring them before me, and I would hear them, and I would deal with them, and I would deal with you if only. And he starts to think to himself, if only I were appointed judge. If only I were appointed king. If only I were king. And so eventually, 2 Samuel plots out this story where he sees this opportunity to overthrow his father. And so he rallies an army. And he sends word, tells people, send word that we're going to drive him out of the city. And he does. He chases David out of Jerusalem. And David most likely wrote this psalm when he was lying somewhere, trying to avoid Absalom, unsure of how many soldiers were coming after him. The battle eventually ensues between David and his supporters and Absalom and his supporters, and it's called the Battle of the Wood of Ephraim. And sounds like something out of the Lord of the Rings. But this is a battle between these two guys. and Absalom is killed, and David is restored. He comes back as king. But during those moments of waiting, during that season where Absalom has driven him out, during that moment where David knows, listen, like he's going to send soldiers, he's going to rally the army and come after me. That's what I would do. He writes this psalm. And so he begins. He says, Lord, how many are my foes? How many, right? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. How many are my foes? 2 Samuel, as it's detailed, says that about 20,000 men were killed during the battle alone. So you got to think, more than that come. Right? How many of them are rising up against me? Like, listen, like when I have a bad day, like I think, like there are moments where I'm just like sitting on the couch and like I've got like, little kids running at me and little fists flying, and I think like, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Like, this is not that. This is someone who is fearing for his life. Right? Maybe not the exact same circumstances you find yourself in right now. But I want you to look at this next line, this last line that says, many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. This is what David is hearing. This is what David is feeling in the depths of his heart and mind and in his soul, that, listen, like many are saying of me, it's enough. It's enough that Absalom is after me. It's enough that my own son is trying to kill me. It's enough that I've been driven out of the kingdom. I'm lost. I'm not sure where it's going to go. It's enough that he has rallied my own army against me, the people. He's turned the people against me. It's enough that now they're coming after me. And now what are people saying? That even God has abandoned me. That's it, right? This is what people are saying. It's over for David. Even God has turned his back on David. Like first his own son, then the people of Israel, and now God, every single person has abandoned him. At least that's what is being said about him. And that, I think, becomes a felt experience that you and I can identify with. Maybe not right now, maybe to varying degrees. Maybe you'd use different words, right? But you got to remember, like even Jesus on the cross mocked for what? It says, save yourself. God won't deliver you. And my God, why have you forsaken me? God has abandoned him. That's what people say about Jesus and about David, that God even has abandoned him. You're going to find yourself in seasons of life where it feels like God is absent. You're going to find yourself in situations where people around you say, there is no help for her in God. There is no help for him in God. When they do, this is the promise of these Psalms, is that you are given an opportunity to name it before God. When you feel like God has abandoned you, don't just go off into abandonment. Name it. When others say, there is no help for you left in God, even God has left the building, name the abandonment. Name the questions, name the emotion, name that place in your own heart and in your own mind, write it down, speak it, tell somebody, name it, because it is the right and it is the real place to start. Many are saying, this is what David is hearing, and then he continues, but you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory. The one who lifts my head high, I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. I don't know about you, but like there are moments where I read David in the Psalms, and I'm like, man, like I don't know, like should I trust this? This guy seems to exaggerate a lot of the numbers some of the time, right? Like he really feels it. But the 2 Samuel backs it up. Like this is a moment where he's not blowing up the number. This is accurate. This is what is going on. This is his felt experience. This is his emotion. This is his reality. They have abandoned me and they assail me. In prayer, though, David speaks what he knows to be true. Right? They say God has abandoned me, but I say God is a shield around me. God says, I am a shield around you. Right? The one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord and he answers me. They say that God has abandoned me, but God says, I am with you. They say, look, like your enemies move to attack you and destroy you. God says, I am a shield around you. I call out to the Lord, it says, and he answers me from his holy mountain. The Lord is near, right? This is the hope that the psalmist learns to express in these moments, that though there be enemies on all sides, though people may say God has abandoned me, though I'm lying in a forest waiting to see who's going to come through, like to destroy me, God is with me. The Lord is near, and not only is he near, but the Lord is active. This is the promise to Moses in Exodus 14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. Over and over again, the Psalms declare this to be true about God. God is our refuge and strength. Psalm 46 declares an ever-present help in trouble. Psalm 18, the Lord is my rock and my fortress, my Savior, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. The word shield is used to describe God in the Psalms alone 15 times, to describe God as one who protects, one who stands in for you, one who sustains you. It says, I lie down, I wake, I sleep, I wake, because the Lord sustains me. So I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. I don't know that David in this moment is thinking like God is going to deliver me and I will remain alive. I don't know. I think what he knows to be true is that regardless of the outcome, God is the one who sustains me. And so I will not fear, even though there's a good reason to fear. David's hiding in a forest, right? He's probably looking for a pit to lie down in because that's what generals would do. The army would settle here, and the general or the commanding officer would often go over here into a little pit so that when the enemy attacks, they hear it, and there is time to respond. David's probably finding a pit somewhere to lie down in and wait to figure out what's going to happen next. And he says, listen, I lie down and I sleep. I wake up again because it is the Lord who sustains me. Not because God wills it, right? Not because God demands it. Not because God requires it or has me stuck in this situation and I've got no way out. I've got no other way to deal with it other than to just keep pushing through. That's not what he says. He says, I lie down, I sleep, I wake up because it is the Lord who sustains me. I've shared before that I was on a canoe trip once. We lost all our food over a waterfall. And listen, like I share these stories and then I say, hey, do you want to go on a canoe trip with me? And sometimes people still say yes. And I'm like, okay, right. But we had a canoe go over a waterfall. I wasn't in charge of this canoe trip. I was a camper on this canoe trip. So there you go. Anyways, I went over a waterfall and our food barrels, they got ripped open. The canoes going end over end. And all of the food floated downstream. And so somebody had to like rappel down the waterfall, pry the canoe out of the river. And then we had to canoe. We literally canoed for hours trying to like find all our food again. You know what we found? We found couscous, lots of it. Have you ever had couscous before? Okay, it's couscous. And chocolate chips, maple syrup. We found maple syrup. You can do a lot with maple syrup. And we found pasta sauce, like dry, dehydrated pasta sauce. That was it. It was lucky that we were like toward the end of our canoe trip. We were sustained for the remainder of that trip on couscous with chocolate chips and maple syrup for breakfast and couscous with pasta sauce for dinner. We were hungry, but we got through. We were hungry. I bet you know what it feels like to feel and to be depleted. Not just hungry because you had to eat couscous, right? We were hungry. We were depleted. But at the end of that trip, like ice cream tasted real good. But my guess is that you know what it feels like to be emotionally depleted, spiritually depleted, right? To go sleepless nights and to struggle with wonder and worry and waiting to a point where your soul is hungry, right? My guess is you know exactly what that feels like. Spiritually empty. There have been seasons in my life where I have been sustained by prayer and the presence of God alone. And I know that there have been and there will be seasons of your life where you are sustained in prayer and by the presence of God alone. And maybe it's a season of uncertainty and wonder and waiting, and maybe it's a season where you are going through medical treatment and you don't know you're going to come out on the other side of it. And maybe it's a season where you're wondering what's going to happen to my kids. They're in a moment where, it feels like things could become very different very quickly. And maybe it's a moment where you don't know what's going to come next. And in those seasons, in those moments, I think the Psalms turn us back again to a God who sustains, to a God who offers his presence, and to a God who is close and is near. That's why we believe that prayer is so important. Not just praying on your own and praying in community. This is why we believe that rhythms of prayer matter, because God is present. And so out of this declaration, David says this, "Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God." Now this is his request. "Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked." That's an oddly specific request, okay? It sounds harsh. It is harsh. The request that David makes is one filled with anger and a desire for even revenge. He says, listen, strike, not just strike them down, strike them on the jaw, not just be rid of them, break their teeth on the way out. This is angry. And I don't know if you've ever had a moment where you shout in anger before God, toward God. I know I have. There's a moment in Bruce Almighty where Bruce is ignoring all the signs, right? You know this moment. And so he says, if only I had a sign, and there's a road sign that pops up, road out, don't go, don't pass, bridge out, danger, danger, stop, stop, stop. And he ignores it. And then there's a truck that sweeps in, and it's a road sign truck. And it's stop, 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 stop. All of these road signs shouting stop at Bruce. And so then he ignores it. He actually speeds around it, and he ends up crashing his car in a ditch. And he yells at God, right? What does he yell? He's running around. He's like, "Smite me, almighty, smite." He's yelling for God to do something. And I'm not suggesting you yell those words, but I am saying that what the Psalms do is they direct your emotion toward God, the very real, raw emotion that you have. Deliver me. Right? Why does it matter? Because it is real, and it is authentic. And it is directed toward God. If you're a follower of Jesus, I hate to break it to you, but you're still going to have angry and violent thoughts. You're still going to have moments where you want to shout. You're still going to have moments where you want for revenge. And again, one of the things that the Psalms remind us of is that the right place to direct those thoughts and emotions and experiences is toward God. This is David's honest plea. I've got no doubt that David is asking God to strike down his enemies. David would rather live, and he'd rather remain king. But the beauty of what a psalm does, and these Psalms of Lament especially, is that they end with promise. And that's important for us to see, and this is where we're going to close today. Because David turns. And this is what he declares to be true at the end of all of his complaint, at the end of all of his request for violence and very specific retribution for his enemies. At the end, what does he declare? He says, "From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. From the Lord comes deliverance." This is the confidence that comes from declaring the other things to be true, that God will deliver me. Right? The demand for God to strike the enemies on the jaw and to break the teeth of the wicked, right? What does that do? It releases control of it. It says, okay, I'm not going to be the one to go after retribution. I won't be the one to pick up a sword or a club, I guess, again, and break somebody's teeth in. I won't be the one to enact judgment. That belongs to God. And as we turn, as the Psalms encourage us to turn our hearts and our minds and our emotions toward God, at the end of the day, what they remind us of is that the next move, resolution, judgment, whatever it may be, only ever comes properly from God. So lay down the anger, and lay down the desire, and lay down the judgment, and lay down the, I'm going to go and fight. Lay down all of those things because God has heard you. And that's the confidence that David has when he declares, like, from the Lord comes deliverance. What does that mean? It says, it's not going to come from my hand. King of Israel, not going to come from my hand. Deliverance won't come from me. Deliverance will come from God. And deliverance must come from God. And God is going to do what only he can do. This is the confidence that comes. To not pick up, but to surrender. And to let God move in the ways that he's going to move. And so my hope, my prayer, as we move our way through the Psalms this summer, is that you would learn to give voice and you'd practice giving voice to some of the emotions that maybe you otherwise wouldn't. And to learn in doing so that there is freedom in knowing that God is one who works on your behalf.